Hey, it's Mike here. You may have heard that apparently plant milks make children shorter. Yes, there has been a recent study that led to a slew of media articles like this one on the growing concern about non-cow's milk alternatives because they're linked to shorter kids. Now, it has been over a week since these articles came out, but the advantage of coming late to the party here is that another level to the story has been uncovered, which makes this whole thing more interesting and more relevant. So we're gonna look at a ton of studies on the topic and investigate this further and find some answers and put the whole thing into perspective. All right, here is the study looking at 5,000 children based off correlation in contrast to cow's milk. Quote, for each daily cup of non-cow milk consumed, children were 0.4 centimeters shorter. And in the most extreme comparison, quote, the height difference for a child aged 3 years consuming 3 cups non-cow milk per day relative to 3 cups of cow milk per day was 1.5 centimeters. Yes, 3 cups a day of cow's milk is quite a bit for a 3-year-old, but no, 1.5 centimeters isn't really that much. It's like half of an inch, and even one of the main authors of the study, Jonathan McGuire, who we're actually gonna look at closer later, referred to it as, quote, a little bit shorter. But here's where the study and the articles fell short. There seems to be a built-in assumption within the language of the articles and the studies that this little bit of excess growth within young children is normal, healthy, and desirable, and not that it's possibly just the result of feeding children exogenous mammalian hormones leading to unnatural results. And this brings me to, you may have guessed it, IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1, which is an actual mammal growth hormone, which I talk about a lot because it's important, that is actually contained within milk and also triggers mechanisms that raise our IGF-1 separately, as this study stated, quote, the IGF-1 may be either absorbed from milk or stimulated by its ingestion or both. As this study mentions, high milk consumption means a 10 to 20% increase in IGF-1 in adults, but for children, shockingly, a 20 to 30% increase. This milk IGF-1 boost is not controversial. Even the study at hand admits it with, quote, cow milk protein has also been shown to stimulate serum IGF-1 concentrations that may increase height via the growth hormone IGF-1 axis, which promotes cellular growth in bones and in other body tissues. Growth in other tissues. That reminds me, that excess IGF-1 promotes cancer, increases cancer risk. How did they forget that? I don't know, but I'm not the only one perturbed here. Some experts like Pamela Fergusson, PhD in nutrition, said, quote, a more concerning possibility is that if children drinking cow's milk grow taller, this is a result of IGF-1, an insulin-like growth hormone naturally occurring in cow's milk that has been linked to an increased risk of cancer. I'm troubled that researchers would omit this possibility from their press release, though they did mention it in their published paper. One very relevant condition that can teach us some lessons here is acromegaly, like Andre the Giant had, and possibly Abraham Lincoln, interestingly enough. Acromegaly literally is abnormally high levels of IGF-1. As this study mentions, it can be diagnosed simply by looking at the high levels of IGF-1 in a subject, but as this study mentions, sadly it is linked to higher cancer rates, likely due to the IGF-1. Now, going back to the main plant milks make kids shorter study, again, they did mention the IGF-1, but not only did they not mention the cancer connection, but they really painted IGF-1 in a good light. That non-cow milk lacks IGF-1 as if it's a missing nutrient. This more balanced study interestingly looked at all of these issues: milk, IGF-1, childhood growth, and cancer. Their conclusion was, quote, these data provide some evidence that variation in childhood milk and dairy product intakes underlies associations of leg length, IGF-1, and cancer risk, and that it's the milk. And there's a whole other angle here beyond just IGF-1, and that is that it's possible that this cocktail of mammalian hormones is simply accelerating the period to puberty for children. What we're talking about here is precocious or early puberty, which is an epidemic, at least here in the US, where about 1 in 6 children at the age of 7 are showing signs of early puberty, and about 30% by the age of 8, which is ridiculous. And while it's not the only factor, dairy certainly plays a role. From this study, quote, several components of dairy products have been linked to early menarche or first periods for girls. One component is the literal mammalian estrogens that are circulating in milk that we can watch, as this study shows, just raise our estrogen levels whether we're male or female. And it's not just specific components. As this study mentions, we see the associations in populations between higher milk consumption and precocious puberty. And this is really important because the earlier a girl goes through puberty, the more sex hormones they will be exposed to over their lifetime, which means an increased risk of breast cancer. As this study mentions, every year that you can delay puberty means 7% lower breast cancer risk later on in life. And it's not just a risk for women. This study on 9,000 men found that daily milk consumption in adolescents was associated with an over 3 times incidence of prostate cancer. But what's really weird about the main study at hand and the subsequent articles is that despite the majority of the world being lactose intolerant and cow's milk being loaded with growth hormones, they paint it as if it's the plant milk making you shorter, not that cow's milk might be having some weird unnatural growth effect. It's like they're really trying to insinuate that we require cow's milk to grow to a normal height. So do we require it? No. Quick reminder from the Journal of Pediatrics, quote, "Humans have no nutritional requirement for animal milk." Unless that animal is human. But it starts to actually seem shady when you consider that not only did the authors neglect the IGF-1 cancer connection in the paper, but they also failed to mention the IGF-1 aspect at all in the press release. Why did they do that? That is the million-dollar question, or maybe I should say $90,000 question, because that lead author, Jonathan McGuire, has been taking dairy industry money for years. He took $90,000 from the Canadian dairy industry in 2011, and then subsequently released a cluster of dairy-funded studies, all of which disclosed their dairy industry funding, yet this year, quote, "None of the authors reported a conflict of interests related to this study." No conflicts of interest? How about a career of dairy industry funding? So at this point, we really have to call into question the accuracy of these findings, and furthermore, whether or not this entire study was designed from the ground up to make plant milks look bad, because after all, they are starting to massively cut into the profits, the market share of dairy. So we have 2 possible scenarios. Either the findings are completely bunk, or they are accurate and due to the exogenous mammalian hormones exerting growth pressures and increasing cancer risk. Another point, assuming that those findings are accurate, it's still not clear whether this taller child height actually represents a taller adult height, or if it's just an indicator of accelerating puberty, which, as the studies have shown, is linked to dairy and also an increased risk of cancer. So either way you look at it, it's nothing to brag about. Dairy is horrible. And these tactics of media blitzes and constantly trying to make research that makes people feel better about dairy is really only necessary as the facade of dairy crumbles and people realize all the negative effects. I mean, Big Broccoli doesn't need to put on multi-million-dollar campaigns to ensure people that broccoli is healthy and there are no negative effects of broccoli. In the end, plant milks just don't hold the same risks that cow's milk does. They don't have the mammalian hormones, they don't have the cholesterol, they don't have the actual cow immune cells and all of the autoimmune triggering cow proteins, but plant milks are still nutritious and delicious. Oh, and did I mention you don't have to worry about the baby male almonds? Not like the baby male calves who meet a horrid fate in even the most humane, wonderful dairy operations among the other atrocities of the dairy industry. As for those articles, I think a more correct title might have been Dairy Industry Employee Finds That Cow's Milk Boosts Unnatural Growth Associated with Cancer. All right, that's it for today. Feel free to let me know your thoughts down below and keep your eye out for my upcoming cookbook, which is getting there. You may have seen some of the delicious recipes posted on my Instagram, which you can also check out. All right, thanks for watching and see you next time. And like and subscribe.